The air in the underground chamber was thick with the scent of ozone and ancient, suffocating wealth. I stood at the very edge of the torchlight, wrapped in a cloak that smelled of rain and forgotten dreams, clinging to a borrowed invisibility that was the only thing I truly owned. In the center of the room, the elite of the Lunar Spires threw around bids of fertile land and pure-blood lineages as if they were trading grain. They weren't bidding on a man, they were bidding on a weapon. Then, they brought him out. Zereth Vargan didn't walk, he was hauled, encased in a cage of thick, rune-etched silver that glowed with a sickly, blue light. He was a mountain of suppressed violence, his bare chest mapped with scars that told a story of 1,000 battles, but the silver was burning him, hissing against his skin to keep the wolf at bay. I waited for the familiar coldness to settle in my chest, the satisfaction of seeing a predator caged. Instead, the coin in my palm began to scream. It didn't make a sound, but it vibrated with a heat so intense it felt like a heartbeat syncing with my own. Suddenly, Zereth's head snapped up. His eyes, burning like dying stars, cut through the darkness and locked onto mine with a terrifying, absolute recognition. Before my mind could scream no, my feet moved. I stepped out of the shadows, the glowing coin held high, shattering the silence of the room. The night I traded my last coin to free a rogue from a silver cage, I didn't know the cage was never built to hold him. It was built to hold me, away from him. The silence that followed my step was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the breath from the lungs of every highborn wolf in the spires. I knelt, my fingers trembling as I placed the glowing coin onto the cold stone floor. The moment the metal touched the ground, the bidding stopped. The coin's light didn't just flicker, it expanded, a blinding, sacred gold that raced across the floor like wildfire, activating the ancient mercy rite. It was a law older than the spires, a sacred exchange that demanded freedom for a life debt. I was a woman with nothing, invoking a power the wealthy had tried to bury in the dust. Zereth leaned against the silver bars, his gaze fixed first on the radiant seal, then on me. The air hummed with a low, predatory vibration as he bowed his head, a silent, official acceptance of the trade. With a sound like shattering glass, the silver cage disintegrated. The elite scrambled back, expecting a massacre, but Zereth didn't move toward the exits. He walked straight to me. He moved with a heavy, deliberate grace, stopping only when his heat crowded my space. Before the stunned crowd, he reached out, his clawed hand cupping my jaw with a possessiveness that made my blood sing. He claimed me right there, quietly, completely, turning the girl they laughed at into the only thing he cared to own. Stay to the end to see how Eliara navigates her new life. Welcome to my channel, Bound to the Alpha. If you're enjoying this journey, hit that subscribe button, like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comment section below. The heavy iron door groaned shut, locking us into a windowless chamber beneath the auction floor. The only light came from a single, flickering lantern that cast long, dancing shadows across the damp stone walls. Here, the power dynamic shifted again. Zereth was contained by the four walls, but no longer caged by silver. I was technically free, yet the sheer weight of his presence made the air feel thin and dangerous. He didn't pace like a beast. He stood perfectly still, watching me with an intensity that seemed to peel back my skin. Why the coin, Eliara? His voice was a low grade of velvet and gravel. I looked down at my empty palm, still stinging from the heat. It was all I had, I whispered, the truth feeling too small for the moment. I didn't know it would do that. It didn't just do something, Zereth said, stepping into the lantern's glow. That coin was never currency. It's a resonance seal, a fragment of an ancient compact that only activates when it finds its mechanical match. It didn't glow because you spent it. It glowed because I was there to answer it. He moved closer, the heat of his body radiating through my thin cloak. They told you that you were packless, didn't they? They lied. You aren't packless, Eliara. You are unmapped. There is a world of difference between having no home and being the map itself. The bond between us hummed, a low-frequency vibration that settled in my marrow, undeniable and terrifyingly vast. He knew exactly what I was, even if he wasn't ready to tell me, and for the first time, my borrowed invisibility felt like it had been stripped away forever. Zereth leaned against the heavy oak table, his presence filling the cramped room until I could feel the heat of his skin without touching him. The binding law isn't a simple contract, Eliara, he said, his voice dropping into a register that vibrated in my chest. It is a permanent tether. Our emotions will bleed into one another. There is no separation, no distance, until death. It is a cage of a different kind. I looked at my hands, still trembling. And if I can't do that? Then walk away, he said, his expression unreadable. The bond will ache, but I will not pursue you. You are free to return to the shadows of the spires. I frowned, looking up at the man I had just spent my life's only inheritance on. Why give me a choice now? You've already claimed me. Because you gave me one, Zereth replied, his gaze softening into something painfully sincere. You didn't just unlock the cage, you gave me the choice of whether to walk out. I am returning the favor. The silence stretched between us, thick with the weight of the unknown. I took a breath, reached out, and placed my hand over his. I'm staying. The moment my skin met his, the bond detonated. A wave of crushing solitude crashed through me, decades of Zereth's isolation so dense it had its own gravity. Simultaneously, he recoiled as he felt the jagged edge of my own deepest wound, the absolute conviction that I was unworthy of the very salvation I had just chosen. The seal was set, our broken pieces finally forced to acknowledge one another. We slipped out of the spires under the cover of a bruised, pre-dawn sky, the city's jagged silhouette fading behind us. We hadn't made it 2 miles into the dense tree line when the air changed, sharpening with the scent of silver and predatory intent. They didn't growl like mindless rogues, they moved with the silent, surgical coordination of professional hunters. The ambush was a blur of silver-tipped steel and raw power. Zereth didn't just fight, he dismantled them. He moved with a terrifying, fluid efficiency, his claws finding throats and heart seals before the hunters could even register his shadow. It wasn't the violence that frightened me, but the fluency of it, the way death seemed to be a language he had spoken since birth. When the last of them fell, Zereth stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving as steam rose from his skin in the morning chill. He didn't look at the bodies. He looked at me, his eyes dark with a new kind of gravity. They aren't here for me, Eliara, he said, wiping a streak of dark blood from his cheek. Those weren't guards sent to reclaim an escaped slave. They were mercenaries hired to eliminate a threat. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a jagged whisper. They've been watching that coin for longer than you've owned it. They didn't expect me to be freed, they expected you to be found. The hunt isn't for a rogue alpha anymore. It's for you. The journey ended at a jagged skyline of collapsed archways and silvered stone. This wasn't the kingdom the world remembered Zereth losing, it was an older, deeper scar, the ancestral cradle of his bloodline, long ago erased from the maps of the Lunar Spires. The ruins were magnificent even in their decay, with ancient architecture struggling against the suffocating grip of thorns and ivy. I don't want to rebuild what they burned, Zereth said, his voice echoing off the skeletal walls as the first gray light of dawn touched the horizon. I intend to build what should have existed before the world got small and greedy. He didn't wait for permission. By the time the sun fully crested the ridge, he was clearing stone with a rhythmic, tireless strength. I watched him for a long time before I finally knelt in the dirt and began to work alongside him. Our days became a cycle of heavy labor, but the nights were harder. In the quiet of the embers, Zereth's gaze would settle on me, heavy with a challenge I wasn't ready to meet. He could feel it through the bond, the hum of something ancient and powerful building in my marrow, a resonance that matched the coin's light. But every time that heat flared, I pushed it back into the dark. I wasn't incapable of shifting, I was choosing to be small because the alternative was too terrifying to name. I was hiding in my own shadow, even as the walls around us began to rise. The rumors moved through the wild faster than a winter storm. By the second week, they began to arrive, the broken, the exiled, and the packless wolves who had spent years hiding in the seams of the territories. They didn't come because they feared the name Zereth Vargan. They came because they had heard the story of the woman with one coin and a choice that defied the spires. The story of the auction had already shifted into myth, and when the newcomers reached the ruins, they didn't look to the massive Alpha King for permission. They looked to me. I was standing near the rising western wall, my hands stained with limestone dust, when the first group approached. They didn't kneel to Zereth's strength, they knelt to me, recognizing a sovereignty in my exhausted frame that I still refused to acknowledge. I tried to step back, to point them toward Zereth, but his hand caught my shoulder, grounding me. "They aren't here for my scars, Eliara," he murmured, his voice a low rumble of pride. "They are following your choice. You invoked a law the world thought was dead, and you cannot unchoose that power now." By the time the first moon cycle completed, 40 wolves had made their dens among our ruins. They looked at me with a reverence that felt like a weight I couldn't carry. I still hadn't shifted, and in the quiet of the night, I still couldn't say my own name with anything resembling belief. The fragile piece of the ruins shattered when an old traveler, eyes milky with age, stopped at our gates. He didn't see the dust on my cloak, he saw the coin I now wore on a cord around my neck. He fell to his knees, not in fear, but in a reverence that chilled my blood. He named the coin for what it truly was, a Vensari lineage seal. I wasn't just a scavenger or a healer. I was the living authority of the Vensari Accord, the bloodline that had authored every territorial law, including the very mercy rite that had unlocked Zereth's cage. I found Zereth in the high hall, the moonlight catching the scars on his shoulders. The confrontation was quiet, which made it deadlier. "You knew," I whispered, the bond between us vibrating with my rising shock. "You didn't accept the trade because of some fated pull. You accepted because you knew who I was." Zereth turned, his face a mask of hard truths. I suspected the moment I saw the glow. Only a Vensari could trigger a resonance that powerful. The air in the room felt like ice. I stepped into his space, my voice trembling. "Did you accept me because of the woman who stood there, or because you needed the legal authority of the Accord to reclaim your throne?" Through the bond, his answer came back thick and heavy, both. It was the truth, a raw, unshielded honesty, but it felt like a second betrayal. He hadn't just been waiting for a mate, he had been waiting for a key. The echo of Zereth's honesty hung in the air like a cold mist, and I couldn't stay to watch the firelight play over the face of a man who had seen me as a key before he saw me as a woman. I walked until the rising walls of our new kingdom became jagged silhouettes against the starlight, stopping only where the forest began its deep, rhythmic breathing. In the crushing solitude of the territory's edge, I stopped searching for the line between being chosen and being used. I stopped trying to prove I was worthy of the Vensari name. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered: what was the truth of my own heart in that auction hall? I had stepped into the light before I knew the coin was a seal. I had risked everything for a broken stranger before I knew I was a queen. My act was real before his knowledge of my identity was even relevant. I didn't forgive myself for being valuable, I forgave myself for being human. The shift came not as a struggle, but as a homecoming. It was luminous, enormous, and ancient, a white-hot detonation of power that ripped through the bond and echoed across the ruins. Every wolf in the territory shifted in involuntary response to the call of their true authority. When I finally drew breath in my human form again, Zereth was standing there. He didn't look triumphant. He looked shattered by a relief so complete it finally broke the last wall between us. The territorial lords arrived at our gates with the arrogance of men who believed laws were merely ink on parchment. They came with a delegation of silken robes and silver-tipped spears, ready to argue that my claim was a fluke and my standing in the 5 territories was non-existent. They didn't see a queen, they saw the scavenger they had discarded. I met them at the gate alone. I didn't need an army to stand behind me when the very ground beneath their feet remembered my blood. When the lead elder began his practice dismissal, I silenced him with a single breath. For the first time, I spoke my full lineage name into the open air. The response was instantaneous. The coin against my chest flared with a blinding, celestial light, and a low hum vibrated through the earth, echoing across every border in the 5 territories. The Vensari Accord wasn't just a contract, it was the foundation of our world, and it recognized its heir. The lords weren't defeated by swords, they were made structurally irrelevant as every legal claim they held re-anchored to me. Zereth stepped up to my right shoulder, a silent guardian to the authority I finally claimed. We didn't reclaim the territory through conquest, I remembered it into existence by finally refusing to forget who I was. The coin grew quiet in my palm, its work finished. Thank you so much for staying to the very end of this journey. If you loved Eliara and Zereth's story, show your support by hitting like, share, and subscribe. Click the Join the Pack button to never miss an update, and let me know in the comments, which territory are you watching from?